What's up guys, and welcome to another comparison video. I am super stoked for this one. We are currently in a 2022 Porsche 718 Cayman GT4, and we'll be comparing it to a 2020 BMW M2 CS. I'm no stranger to the GT4, as just in the last couple of months I've driven two different examples. The owner Jay mentioned that for this one it's pretty much all stock, except he has some 19-inch aftermarket wheels with some Michelin PS4S tires. He uses these stock 20-inch wheels purely for the track. This particular GT4 is spec'd out in this gorgeous shade of blue. It's called Shark Blue for you Porsche fanatics. We have the carbon bucket seats that he's modified to be tilted back a little bit more. Stock bucket seat position is just way too upright. This is a lot more comfortable for me. Of course, we have PASM adaptive dampers and Porsche Sports exhaust as standard. A car like this nowadays on the used market commands an asking price of around $125,000 to $140,000. Whereas something like the M2 CS on the used market goes for around $100,000. So the question is, where should you spend your $100,000+ if you want a German track-focused sports car? Few specs about the GT4. It's powered by a 4-liter naturally aspirated flat-six engine. It makes 414 horsepower, 309 pound-feet of torque. This particular car is equipped with a 6-speed manual. Of course, you can also get it with a 7-speed PDK. All the power gets sent to the rear axle. It comes standard with a limited slip differential. The car weighs around 3,200 pounds. Electric power steering, adaptive dampers, McPherson strut, front suspension. Let's revisit the GT4 once more to set the standard really high and see how that M2 CS compares. Pretty tame startup, if I'm being honest. The last GT4 I drove had aftermarket over-axle pipes. This one has completely stock exhaust. PASM dampers in its stiffer setting. Porsche Sports exhaust, valve open. Right away, I can just push this thing with so much confidence. The steering is so precise, although a bit low on feedback since it is an electric power steering rack. So easy to heel toe, amazing throttle response. Excellent brake feel, such a firm brake pedal. The front end is just so sharp. Now the gearing's pretty long. Second gear goes to over 80 miles an hour. It's been a problem that a lot of people have had with Porsche GT cars, and this one is no exception. Plenty of power, 414 horsepower, 309 pound-feet. Feels just right for a car of this size and weight. So easy to bang off those downshifts. It's just such a natural car to drive. Porsche really dialed in the inputs of the car as well as how they correlate to what the car does, the outputs. Everything feels one-to-one, everything's super direct. So as a driver, I can hop in this car and immediately start pushing it. This engine makes such a good sound. I actually do agree, in completely stock form, it doesn't make as visceral and raw of a sound as the prior generation GT4, but there's still a really aggressive induction note from inside the car. So all things considered, it's still a great sounding engine. Maybe just slightly synthetic, slightly muted compared to the older GT cars. Car's moving around a bit. PS4S tires are actually not very high grip for this caliber of car. I'm used to driving this car on Cup 2s or similar, so having a lower grip tire actually makes it a little bit more fun, a little bit more lively and exciting, and it keeps me as a driver on my toes. Still plenty of grip though. And the mid-engine balance just really shines through in the Cayman platform. Every generation of Cayman has felt this way, but especially in this 718 GT4, you feel that Porsche has had a few generations now to dial in this platform to be perfect. It feels mid-engine in the best way possible. That low polar moment of inertia just allows this car to pivot around its center point so easily. You can steer it with your steering inputs as well as the throttle. The car gives you options. But if I did have one complaint with the GT4, it's that it's almost a little bit too clinical. It almost feels sterile in some ways, unless you're driving this thing really hard. But as a whole, when you're just putting around town or maybe driving in a slightly spirited fashion, the car doesn't evoke a whole lot of emotion, if I'm being honest. The engine's fantastic, but outside of that, it's a little bit numb, a little bit too clinical in how it performs and how it just behaves so well. It does everything you ask of it. It never wants to misbehave. It never wants to step out unless you're very intentional about making it do so. Is that a flaw? I'm not so sure. I guess it depends on what you prefer, but for me, sometimes I like a little bit of uncertainty in my sports cars. This 6-speed manual, by the way, is excellent. Very direct engagement into each gear. Also, this PASM suspension in the stiffer setting feels great on a canyon road. Wow, just the right amount of straight line performance. This car doesn't need any more horsepower. I know that's exactly what the GT4 RS has, like another 80 horsepower or so, and I'm sure I wouldn't complain driving a GT4 RS, but 414 horsepower really is just enough for this platform. The GT4 is just as good as I remember it. Can't believe I've now driven 3 in the past couple of months. It is just a fantastic car in every sense of the word. It is so capable, so precise, so well balanced, even has a very well built and comfortable interior. But like I mentioned, it is just a little bit sterile at times, unless you're pushing it to the ragged edge. This car doesn't really make you feel some type of way. And I want to see if that M2 CS has a little bit of a different personality. All right, we're now in the 2020 BMW M2 CS, or Competition Sport. Ever since I drove the BMW M2 Competition, which is the much cheaper version of this M2, I've been completely enamored with this platform with the S55 engine. The base M2 with the N55 engine that came out 7-8 years ago didn't really impress me all that much. The engine was very torquey, very linear, but wasn't really all that exciting, and some of the driver inputs and handling of that car just felt a little bit off to me. But now we're in the ultimate version of the F87 generation platform. So the M2 CS gives us quite a few things over the M2 Competition. There's much more extensive use of carbon fiber. We have a carbon roof, carbon splitter, carbon spoiler, a vented hood, gorgeous gold wheels, carbon ceramic brakes as an option. All in all, this car should weigh a little over 3,400 pounds. We also have these very aggressive sport seats that are specific to the M2 CS. Also on the interior, we have an Alcantara wrapped steering wheel, Alcantara on the dash here with a really cool CS logo. Definitely a little bit more special than the M2 Competition. We have lost the center armrest here in favor of some lightweight Alcantara trim. In terms of specs, this still has the S55 engine carried over from the M2 Competition and F80 M3, but in this state of tune, it makes 444 horsepower, 406 pound-feet of torque. 6-speed manual transmission as standard. You can also get it with a 7-speed DCT. The rear E-diff has been tuned to lock up more aggressively compared to the M2 Comp. And for the first time in M2 history, this got adaptive dampers. Oh, by the way, the owner, Rowan, did put some Bridgestone RE71 RS tires on these wheels. So in terms of drive modes, we're going to go into Rowan's custom M2 mode, which sets the engine, chassis, and steering into the maximum Sport Plus setting, but then we're going to manually dial the suspension or chassis back into Sport. Sport Plus, I tried it earlier and it's just a little bit too stiff for this bumpy road. We're also going to turn DSC fully off because that's the only way you're allowed to rev match your own downshifts. Pretty annoying how BMW does not let you separate the rev matching from the rest of the settings unless you turn DSC fully off. M2 CS. I've been waiting to drive one of these for so long, especially after the M2 competition blew me away just how competent and yet playful and fun it was on the same road. All right, 3rd gear. Lots of torque, even from 3,000 RPM. Right away, this car is more lively than that GT4 by far. It's definitely a top-end engine, but not in the same way that that GT4's flat 6 is. In this one, you get turbo lag. And then as you hit that mid-range, you get a surge of torque from the boost, from the twin turbochargers that just rockets you forward until you hit the 7,600 RPM rev limiter. Does it make as good of a sound as the GT4? No, not even close. It's much more subdued, even though the GT4 is subdued for Porsche flat 6 standards. Steering feel from this EPS rack, pretty good, better than the M2 competition. Dare I say it has more feedback than that GT4 steering rack. Pretty easy to heel toe rev match. The straight line acceleration is actually really impressive. The car feels heavier than the GT4, yes, and the polar moment of inertia is much higher. But this car, I think, strikes a better balance of the excitement and the liveliness and the sheer technical competence. Look at this, still plenty of mid-corner grip. Granted, we are on a much stickier tire. RE71 RSs are a track compound. Still feels pretty nimble in these hairpins. Properly quick car, not only on the straights, but also lots of cornering grip and composure. With the dampers set to the middle setting, it feels really good. It's still livelier than the GT4. It doesn't give me the same level of confidence attacking corners and going over bumps, but it keeps me on my toes more. Brakes feel really good, these carbon ceramics. Engine sounds a little bit muted. Classic BMW rubbery shifter feel, but that's just par for the course. It doesn't detract from the experience, at least. At least the throttle response from the S55 is excellent. Gearing's not as long as that GT4's, so I get to enjoy more of that engine at the top end in 2nd gear. I just love how it merges most of the technical competence of the GT4, but with a dollop of playfulness and excitement that the GT4 is missing most of the time. This is a driver's car in a slightly different sense of the term. GT4 is all about that clinical precision. It feels like you're wielding a surgeon's scalpel, but only when you're driving it flat out. The M2 CS is actually more entertaining at 6/7/10ths, and when you push it to 8/10ths and beyond, it comes alive even more. It's more linear in terms of how it rewards the driver the harder you push it. And the straight line performance honestly doesn't feel any slower than the GT4s. Once you're on boost, this engine pulls. And since this car is maybe 200 to 300 pounds heavier, yes, that is a noticeable difference, especially in the corners and under braking. It still feels nimble, it still feels tossable. The front end has plenty of grip. This has better steering feel, in my opinion, than the GT4, especially with the steering mode set to Sport Plus. It seems to remove all of the assistance and you just get that mostly unadulterated raw steering feel. Such an amazing car. And you know, having driven the brand new M2, the base model of the new generation, this has far better steering feel. The engine isn't quite as linear and punchy down low, and it actually doesn't make as much top end power either. But back to the GT4 versus M2 CS comparison, not that I have six figures just burning a hole in my wallet, but if I had the money, I think 100 grand for the M2 CS gets you an actually more special driving experience than that GT4. The GT4 is a great car, don't get me wrong, but it just does things a little bit too well. And actually, if you look at rarity and road presence, I think the M2 CS stands out even more because less than 600 of these were brought to the United States. So at a $25,000 to $40,000 savings compared to a GT4, I'd say actually in some ways this M2 CS feels like a little bit of a bargain. But the real bargain is getting an M2 competition for around $55,000 and throwing about 15-20K of mods into it to make it feel as good or better. A big thank you to Rowan and Jay for letting me drive their cars. Let me know what you think about this comparison. Which would you have for the money? Thank you guys for watching. See you guys in the next video.